Okay, so we're working in WPF, and in this video we're going to be looking at Windows and user controls, which are classes. So I don't like to say classes, Windows and user controls, because Windows and user controls are classes in WPF. So I go ahead and start my WPF application. Make sure I name it down here. Click OK. And basically what I want to do is go ahead and show you how right now we have this blank window, and if you look at the code behind, there's nothing back here. So I have this blank window, and if I were to run it, I have an application running. This is an application of just a blank window with the title there called main window, which I'm not concerned with changing right now. But let's look at the difference between a window and a user control. Right now I have this window, and maybe I want to add another window that pops up when this window starts. So if I were to go over here and I would go right click and I go add, and I'm going to go ahead and add a new item, or I can just go right here and add a window. So I'll go ahead and add a window, and as you can see here, it automatically selects WPF, window WPF, because I'm in WPF. And I can name that window, let's say, I'm just going to call it anything. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it the UI, like that, user interface. So I have that UI there. Maybe it's a game, and maybe this pops up when somebody clicks something. So I can go and click add, and as you can see over here to the right, here's my main window, and here's my UI. UI is just like the main window. I double clicked it, and as you can see up here in the tab, it's open in this window here. And as you can see in my code behind, just like that other window, except it's in the class of UI, which tells you that this is a class, I have a blank class definition back here. Now, I want to be able to get this window inside of this window when it loads. So maybe when it loads or when you click a button, but it's pretty much the same. So when we're dealing with classes, we have to do what's called instantiate the class, meaning create the class. So I'm going to go ahead and go in the code behind in my main window, or I can go up here into my main window .xaml.vb, and I'm going to do what's called create a constructor. And a constructor is what happens when a class first starts, meaning whenever this class is created by the code, this is the first piece of code that will start before anything else starts. So that's what that means. And so in Visual Basic .NET and in WPF, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to type sub new, and I'm going to open close brackets, and then I'm just going to hit enter from here, because what it's going to do now is write out the initial components which I need for every class inside of when I'm using WPF, because this right here is going to run this function which does all the windows, it does all the other stuff that I need to do here before anything else is instantiated or created. So I can come up here and put some variables and stuff up here that I need, but I don't want to be in here writing code before this initialized component. All the code that I'm going to write is going to be directly after that, if I were going to write some code here. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and now instantiate this window as a class. So we're going to call that window. We're going to say, let's stem a variable to stick that window in. We're going to say my UI as UI, and then we're going to say, and what I want to do, I want to go ahead and create this variable up at the top of the class so I can use it anywhere else. So right now I have this variable being instantiated as soon as the class starts, and then when any code starts, this is what's going to happen. So now I'm going to go ahead and take this variable, my UI, and now I'm going to instantiate it. I'm going to now create a new class, a new UI class, and that's now I created a class. So if I run this, as you can see, everything runs fine, but I don't have that window because although I instantiated it, I did not show it. I didn't bring it up to the forefront. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this application, and I'm going to go my UI .show, and this is how you do with Windows. So now I created a brand new version of this UI right here, and then I show it. So I'm going to save that, and then I'll go ahead and run that. And as you see here, immediately when this one loads up, this one loads right after, because this code, after this is initialized, then this one starts to initialize. So this is the difference with Windows right here. Oops, sorry. This is the difference with Windows versus user control. The window is on its own. A user control would end up inside of this window. So let's go ahead and look at a user control. So right now we have this window, and now I'm going to go ahead and create a user control. And I'm going to first go into my main window, and I want a place to put the user control, and I'm going to use a grid or canvas. It really doesn't matter. I'm just going to go ahead and name this right now. I'm going to say main grid. If I was using a canvas, I would go ahead and call it a canvas. Now I'm going to go into the code behind, go back here, and this is where I'm going to instantiate a user control. But first I have to go ahead and create a user control. So I'm going to go up to my class portion here, my project. I'm going to right click. I'm going to go all the way down to add, and then I'm going to click on user control. This pops up again, and it shows me user control WPF, and I'm going to go ahead and name my user control, and maybe I might call this buttons user control. Okay. And a lot of times I like to do like this, and the user control is not normally capitalized, but you know, that's the way I do it. It's just so I can know this is buttons user control. And now I go ahead and add that. And as you can see here, user control looks way different. There is no background color, and it's pretty much the same as a window, except there's no background color. And if I go in the background here, you'll see buttons user control. Go to the code behind, is exactly the same. It's a class. And if I were to go sub new to this one, it would instantiate exactly like a class, except VB understands that this is a user control. So now I want to do exactly the same thing I did before when I instantiated my window. I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to create a variable, dim my user control as buttons, buttons user control, and then I'm going to put this as my. And now I'm going to take this right here, and I'm going to instantiate it and create a new one, new buttons UC. So now I have a buttons UC, but the only thing is with user controls, you don't say show. That won't work with user controls. With user controls, what you have to do is you have to add it to a list of things that's supposed to be initialized with the components that's already there, like a grid. So that's why we went and we named our grid down here, because we will be using that here. And the grid has children, so I'm going to say main grid dot children and dot add, and this is how I add my user control to the main window. So I'm going to go ahead and run that, and as we see here, I have my user control inside of the window. Now you're like, well, how come I can't see it? Well, that's the thing. User controls are pretty much, they're invisible. It's just what you add to it. So I'm going to prove to you that that user control actually is there. And I'm going to prove it to you by adding some buttons, like I named it, to the user control. So I'll go ahead and add this button. I'm going to do this here. And I'm going to push that down, and then push this down. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and name these buttons BTNA, just for the sake of demonstration. I'm going to name it very simply B and button C, and then I'll go ahead and change the actual label or the content B C. Alright, so now I have 3 buttons in this user control. Now let's run it again. Let's see what happens. As you can see, I have all these buttons available now in this user control, and I have this window open. I keep doing that. Sorry. Hold on. Alright, so how do we communicate between Windows and user controls? I have these user controls open and I have this window open. How do we communicate between these things? Just the same way you would communicate with any other variable that you created inside of your class. Because this is a user control and we have a variable that actually accesses that user control, we can access anything inside that user control, like the buttons, let's say. But in order to get the buttons abilities, we want to be able to create something called an event handler or a handler in Visual Basic. So even though these things are separate, like that window is separate, when we open up this window here, this window 1, where is it? The UI window. This window is separate. We still have access to it through the variable. So since we have access to it through the variable, I want to go ahead and add some stuff here that I'm going to manipulate a little bit. I'm going to just add this button here, and I might even use this button as a label. I have no idea. But just to demonstrate what I'm talking about, I add the button. The first thing I want to go ahead and do and name that button, BTN. Let's call that info. So I have a button there, and then I'll go ahead and add a label here. LBL message. There we go. And yeah, I'll just leave BTN info and then LBL message just so we can have something to work with. So now when I run this, as we see now, when this first loads, this window loads up with a BTN, with that BTN in there and that button in there, and they have these 3 buttons here. And maybe I'll give this button, let's say, info, like that, just so we can be clear. So now I want to go ahead and access this info, and I maybe want to access this label, and I want to access it when people do things here. Okay, so that means I can use now these variables to go ahead and access that. So I have here my UI.show, and then I add this one here. But now I want to go ahead and be able to respond to the button click in that particular window. So I want to do something called add a handler inside of the main window that actually accesses or captures the click in the secondary window or in a UI window. So I first put add handler, and then I call the name of the object that I want to add it with, but I need the variable name here, not the actual name of the class itself. Variable name, and then I'm going to say what I'm attempting to access. So I want to access the BTN info, and I want to access the method of that info called click. Right? From there, I'm going to go put a comma there, and I'm going to say address of, which basically just means handles, right? What's going to handle this button click, and then I'm going to type something that says BTN info handler. And normally that's kind of how you do this. Now when I hit enter, I'm going to get an error because it's looking for a function here. I do this because I'm going to let Visual Basic write out the function for me, the procedure for me. So I go ahead and click that little arrow, and then it writes it out here for me because I'm a little bit lazy about it. And I go ahead and get rid of that information right there in the middle. Once I do that, now I have this going on here, and now I can go ahead and add whatever I want from here. So whenever I click on this one, this is what's going to happen. So let's just do a test. MSG box. Let's do a message box test, and we'll just say from my UI. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and run that. So now I have, remember this window, I keep doing that. So remember that this window is calling both the user interface and it's calling this one, and the event handlers is all inside of this main window. This has no code in it. So when I click this, as you see, it still does everything, because when I click this, this captures the event. Then it runs the code. Click OK. And as you can see, I'm doing that in one window. So now I want to go ahead and maybe try to, how about when I click this button from this window, I add something to the other window. Well, I have my variable here, btn buttons, and which one, let's see which one had the, okay. So let's create an event handler for btn buttons. So I took that one out. There's nothing happening in here right now. But I'm gonna go ahead and create an event handler for btn buttons now for the user control. So I go ahead and add handler exactly the same as I did before. Everything's exactly the same. And then I'm gonna say UC, because that's the variable that I created. Dot btn a dot click, and then address of btn a I normally like to say what it is, btn a click handler, like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and click the little arrow, and it's going to make it for me, as you see down here. Once I do that, I can go ahead and just take this and make the other buttons for the same user control. And I want to go ahead and change this part right here. Now, as you can see that these don't exist, so I can pretty much do the same thing as I did before. And here they are down here. Now I have something for all of my buttons and all of my windows inside of this one main window. So this main window is being used as somewhat of a controller. So now I want to take, whenever the button that's clicked inside of the info, I want to go ahead and, or let's say if it's clicked inside of button 1, I'm going to add it inside of the label inside of the window. So whenever the user control clicks, the UC buttons, whenever this is clicked, I want to go inside of here and add it to the label. So let's see how that would work. Okay, so I have my access to btn1 and I have the connection up here, btna, sorry. So now all I have to do, and this is why we put these up here so we have access to them throughout. So now all I have to do is say over here, so we're looking for the UI, and when btna is clicked, we'll say .lbl, and there it is, and we say content equals button A was clicked. And I want to do exactly the same thing for all of these, just to show you that it actually works. So I have A, B, and I have C here, all of these connected through the event handler. And I have this one over here, which, let's see what we can do with this one. If I click this one, maybe we get rid of the user control. So I can do something like this. I can say like this, and instead of add, I'll say remove. Now I'm removing that user control from the page by another window. So let's say if I run this now, I have this window here, I have this window here. If I click A, as you can see, I have button A was clicked, button C was clicked, and button B was clicked. Now if I click this one, this should disappear, and there you have it. So now we see how we can interact with windows, we can interact with user controls, with everything inside of one window as a controller, while we use all of these other ones as interface objects that we can throw in and throw out. As you can see, the user control here has no code behind, and this one has no code behind. Now we could use the fact that all of these things here have the constructor, meaning we can make it to where in order to run our window, it requires some information. So let's say every time this user control, let's see, okay, so let's say every time this user control opens up, we want there to be an automatic message. You have to put a message in here, right? Or maybe you have to name this button. Every time this is done, you have to name a button. Okay, so if you have to name a button before it even loads, that means we have to put that information inside of the constructor. So I'm going to go ahead and say sub new here. Now we have our constructor, so this is going to run immediately, and then I can put information right here inside of the new saying creating a variable that we must use in order for this to be instantiated. So I'll say so now that I did this, I'm going to run into an error if I run it. So watch. Do this. I run into an error. Why is that? Because we're trying to use this in window here, and it's saying in order to use my user control, you must put something inside of the constructor, because as we see here, the constructor requires that you fill it with a message. Okay, so that means when I create this, I must put a message in there. This is my message, and now I have a message in there. Now everything is fine and it's going to run, although we don't do anything with the message, but now it's all going to run. So if I wanted to do something with that message, I'll go back here and I will say this btn info.content equals a message. So now I have a message here that we instantiate, that we fill when we instantiate it here. It goes here, and I'm using it here because I said that in order for this user control to be created, I must have something in this area before it's even created. So that's what we said. So now when I run it, initially it's going to start off with that message. As you can see, this is my message here, and everything else still works exactly the same. So I hope this was helpful, and as you understand, we've been working with user controls in Windows, so we can see the difference and we can see how they can work together. A user control can also close a window, and that would be, it wouldn't be show, it would be hide instead of show. So I can make, and it can hide itself. It can hide a show or hide, and it can hide itself. And the one thing you want to be aware of when you get rid of things, like here, I'm removing the children, right? But I still have these handlers going. In order to make this code clean and proper, what I should be doing is when I get rid of this child, I want to remove the event handler. Remove handler. So this is what I should be doing. Okay, so this would be much cleaner code, and I don't have these handlers just sitting around after I get rid of the window, and I can bring them back whenever the window comes back. So now when I run it and I close this down here, the event handlers are gone too, so I don't have to worry about that in memory. So hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, go ahead and send me an email or comment below. Oh, and make sure you subscribe.